This was originally supposed to be an away game for us, but now it's a home game. So welcome to our home. And we look forward to the discussion today on the various topics that you have listed as a result of your agenda. So for the thousands of listeners, and that might not be too far off, let's go around the room, since we have a lot of new faces, and introduce ourselves. And Dr. Lockhart,
yes,
since you're sitting there at the head, we'll start with you.
Good afternoon. Steve Lockhart, Superintendent of Carroll County Public Schools.
Donna Savigny, President of the Board of Education.
Tara Battaglia, Board of Education.
Pat Dorsey, Board of Education.
Kenny Kyler, Board of Education.
Marcia Herbert, Vice President, Board of Education.
Eric Boucher, County Commissioner.
Dick Weaver, Commissioner, District 2.
Steve Lance, District 1.
And Ed Rothstein, District 5.
Dennis Frazier, County Commissioner.
Okay. Thank you all again very much. And this is sort of a precursor to all the wonderful activity that's going to come in the not-too-distant future surrounding the wonderful time of year when we all get into the budgets. And I know that you all have already started to dive into yours and you're this close. But this gives us a precursor, if you will, on what to expect. And some of the other things that we're looking at around the state, specifically the first topic that you have on our agenda, and that's certainly the Kirwan Commission, which has been on the radar of a lot of folks. And I think, Steve, unless you have anything else, I'd say we roll with the first agenda item. Donna, would you like to say a few words first?
Actually, thanks, Commissioner Wance. I did have a couple of things that I wanted to say. And
okay.
First off, I want to say thank you to the commissioners for agreeing to meet with us. And I know, as you said, this was supposed to be a home field advantage for the Board of Ed, but we switched it up due to schedules. It's tough to get 10 people who are elected officials into a room together with our busy schedules. But I want to thank you guys for being open to having this meeting. And I think there's been a fairly long history in the past of our two boards doing a lot of finger pointing, a lot of contentious and confrontational discussions. And I think there's been a general degradation of society in terms of lack of respect and lack of civility in having some of these conversations in the open. And so I really want to thank you guys. Like, I think we can do this better. Our two boards can really talk and work well together. I think we've got a lot of fresh faces, a lot of new perspectives between our two boards, and I think that we can work collaboratively and just do this better going forward. So I really appreciate your openness. And one of the things that I wanted to point out was, you know, a budget process is a negotiation by its very nature, right? And the mark of a good negotiation is that both sides walk away a little bit happy, a little bit unhappy. You know, there's no significant winners or losers. Nobody got taken advantage of. And I think the way that this process went down in the past was that everybody has walked away incredibly unhappy on both sides of the table. And that's not how that's supposed to work, right? So that's why I appreciate our ability to bring this to the table. Let's not avoid or skirt the difficult issues. We definitely have to have those discussions, but let's just do it in a civil way and make sure that this ends well for everyone involved. I think we can do, and by doing that, I think we build trust not only between our two boards, but with the public as well. So thank you again for having us. We're going to keep the presentations, I think, to a pretty bare minimum. These are meant to be topics to spark the conversation, not meant to drive the entire hour and a half that we have together today. So we're going to go through those fairly quickly and then really want to promote just the open dialogue and discussion between all of us. So
okay.
Steve?
If I may, Commissioner Wance, I just want to thank Roberta and Ted for joining us to help put the agenda together. When we sat down, we recognized that we do have new faces. About 50% of our collective boards here are new, first time sitting down together, and so we thought it'd be a good idea to consider some of those challenges we face together and be able to have that conversation. As Ms. Savigny said, the purpose of these meetings is really to provide that opportunity for both boards to have discussion, ask questions, develop understanding, and explore our challenges and opportunities. Thinking with the end in mind too, and we'll get to this at the end, but we certainly see it as appropriate that we could maybe think about this on a regular basis. And so I'll work with Roberta and staff as it relates to perhaps scheduling some quarterly or regularly scheduled meetings as appropriate, as the boards deem appropriate, so that we have built-in time to discuss timely topics that are important to both boards, And we believe, as Ms. Savigny and Mr. Wance has said, that'll help facilitate a good partnership. And we'll also work to make sure that your agenda items, the things that you want to make sure we discuss, are part of that agenda. So in the future, we'll be, obviously, like we are, reaching out to you again and talking about what's coming up, what's important for us to discuss, and make sure that that's on the agenda. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Willems.
Okay.
I know Commissioner Wance, you talked a little bit about the Kirwan Commission, and there are certainly implications for all of us. Mr. John Willems, Esquire, is the Director of Governmental Relations for the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, commonly referred to as MABE, a capacity in which he served for many, many years. And I guess that goes back to the late 90s or early 2000s since you've been in that role, Mr. Willems?
That's correct, although from 1998 to 2001, I was Associate Director of the Maryland Association of Counties.
Yes.
So one time I worked for this side of the room in Annapolis, and since 2001, I've worked for this side of the room.
Right. In his role,
So you're in a good spot. You're in the middle of the
Correct, sir, yes.
and in this role, he serves as the Chief Legislative Strategist and Lobbyist on behalf of 24 local boards of education in Maryland. Keeps us informed of the array of annual bills that impact our education systems and works toward collective views of those local boards of education in Annapolis. And he mentioned his role with MACO. It's a busy time of year, and we know that you're extremely busy. We appreciate you giving us some time today. So with that, Mr. Willems.
Thank you very much. Superintendent, members of the board, members of the Board of County Commissioners, it's a delight to be here, and I do want to be brief in moving through the slides to provide an update on the status of the Kirwan Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education, and to certainly take any questions that you might have about the status of that work. There is a longer history to how we got to 2016 with the study calling for a $2 billion increase in state education aid and a $1 billion increase in county education aid as well. But it really does, in short, go back to a lawsuit arising in Baltimore City in the late 90s about the adequacy of education funding there. And Maryland's approach was to raise all boats by adopting statewide legislation to establish statewide formulas and significantly increase education funding through the Bridge to Excellence Act. And those are the formulas that remain intact for general education aid on a per pupil basis, and then heightened weighted per pupil aid for students who are English learners, eligible for free and reduced price meals, or receiving special education services. So that's the general framework under which we've operated since 2002, FY 2003, and there was a call in that legislation for an update. The state spent $1 million on a study to update our funding formulas, make recommendations, and determined that nearly $3 billion would be needed to have most or all students achieving at the testing level that the state identified as college and career ready, a score of 4 on the PARCC assessment. And I won't go into any more detail on the assessment system other than to say it's in flux, and next year there'll be a new test. So any funding system that's called a standards-based funding system where the standards are in flux, it's also an interesting topic of discussion. In terms of the Kirwan Commission that was formed then to look at the APA study on funding recommendations, but almost immediately took a different tack and decided to bring in a separate new consultant to say not so much what would Maryland students have needed based on class size, numbers of teachers, et cetera, resources to score a 4 on PARCC, but what would it look like if Maryland were to become world class relative to Singapore, Finland, Shanghai, et cetera. And that's the focus of the National Center on Education and the Economy, NCEE. So the Kirwan Commission spent 2 years with that consulting firm and looked at these 5 policy areas: early childhood education, high quality and diverse teachers and leaders, leaders referring to principals primarily, college and career readiness pathways, including both college readiness programs, advanced placement, international baccalaureate type programs, but also clear and meaningful career technology education paths. And then more resources to ensure all students are successful, That's code for Thornton. That's code for increasing resources relative to what I described as the Bridge to Excellence formulas, the general ed amount and the weighted per pupil amounts as deemed appropriate. And then the policy area 5 on governance accountability, I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. High quality early education, a top priority for local boards of education for many years, has been seeking more robust funding for pre-kindergarten. We do not feel or believe that it was ever adequately funded when it was mandated back in 2002 to shift. The shift to full-day kindergarten was. So our half full-time equivalent funding, or 0.5 funding for kindergarten students, was increased to a 1.0 full FTE for those students incrementally over years. We never got an incremental increase of even a 0.5 FTE for our half-day pre-K kids. And you can provide full-day pre-K. You're certainly not going to get a full FTE if you're not going to get a half FTE. So we've never really gotten any state formula funding to support our pre-kindergarten efforts. And so it's been a hue and cry of ours for many years, and it was clearly a priority for the Kirwan Commission. A little more specifically, though, it's expensive, and they don't want to cut out the private providers, providers of high-quality pre-kindergarten services. So it's a public-private partnership. It's always been studied and recommended as such at the state level in Maryland for the last more than a decade. And so it's intended to not have the public school system provide more than 50%, half of the slots for high-quality pre-K, and to have the private providers be striving to maintain the quality that the state deems appropriate for them to get the state funding to support their efforts. And that's an important piece of the puzzle related to pre-K. Another factor are in areas particularly of concentrated poverty, but really statewide, the value of Judy centers, the Judy Hoyer centers, to provide wraparound services that include health and other social services for families, not limited to the traditional classroom instruction at that early education and entry level. High quality teachers and leaders.
You want to wait on questions or throw them in when we can? How do you want to do that?
I'm happy to take questions by section as we go through.
So the pre-K for me, would that be a mandatory thing? Is that what they are suggesting, or would it be voluntary for the jurisdictions?
It would be voluntary. So there's no mandate to do more than provide access. So as a funding authority and as a school board, if you're required to provide access, you have the unknown in terms of who's going to avail themselves of that service, but you know there are going to be costs associated when they do. So if the legislation were to say we're going to increase eligibility for pre-K, right now it's 185% of the federal poverty level. If you increase that to 300%, you're going to have a significant increase in the number of parents who want to take advantage of that service at the public school level. You're going to have demand pressures on the private sector, and you're not only going to have the operating costs arising from that, but also the facility pressures. What we saw 10 or more years ago was moving the 5th graders into relocatable classrooms so that you can have the full-day kindergarten and pre-K students in the building with restrooms in the classrooms and other amenities that you need for our littlest students. And so it's not a mandate for parents, it's not compulsory attendance, but it's a mandate for us to provide access to the services based on the income thresholds initially and for the first several years at the 300% of federal poverty as opposed to the 185 where we're currently at.
Interesting.
So that's not a standard definition of voluntary, is it?
No.
No, it sort of went to get to there, so.
Parents are required to send their students, their children. We are required to stand up facilities for them to come to, whether they come or not. Correct?
Correct.
So it's still going to cost us, regardless of whether it's mandatory or not, because it's mandatory on us.
Certainly within the context of that intended balance between the public access to public school facilities and services and the private provider role, which not every jurisdiction has the capacity either period or the capacity at the high level on the state's quality rating system of the private providers of early education. So that's a challenge.
And in how many of our buildings do we have pre-K? Do we
Cindy,
have that number?
How many pre-K?
All the 4 elementary schools have pre-K,
Okay.
so 18.
Okay.
More fundamental question. The formula associated with the Kerwin Commission is directly linked to per pupil basis, is what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
And yes.
And it was initiated through the concerns in Baltimore.
We've had a per pupil funding system that predates the Bradford case and the rise of the Thornton Commission. So we've had per pupil funding formulas in the past, but since 2002, the entire framework has been per pupil based and wealth equalized, based on county wealth in terms of property and income tax wealth metrics.
And Commissioner Rothstein, you know that that's really where our issues became very apparent as we started experiencing declining enrollment. It was a double whammy, right? You get less funds per pupil, or well, same amount per pupil, but we have less pupils.
But we still have the same amount of teachers
But we
or
still have
educators
the
and
same
buildings.
infrastructure, the same bricks and mortar and fixed expenses.
And we're not the only jurisdiction that is going through this. But meanwhile, the formula and the commission is still focused on only per pupil basis as far as funding.
Primarily, yes.
Okay.
So in terms of high-quality teachers and leaders, the focus here has really been about staffing and salaries, significantly increasing the numbers of teachers and educators and related service professionals in our buildings. By that I mean speech therapists, social workers, counselors, school psychologists, et cetera. And then to give significant raises to the folks we currently have on the payroll and to those new folks coming on board. And in terms of sheer numbers, if the total price tag for Kerwin is $3.8 billion, it's important to keep in mind that $2.6 billion of that is split basically in half between the hiring of more folks and the pay raises to teachers. It's about $1.3 billion, a subject area there relative to this set of recommendations. And so this is an enormous priority for our teachers and our employee organizations. And it was a major feature of that APA study that concluded we were $3 billion behind in terms of adequacy. If you look at class size reduction and the expansion of the number of staff required to achieve smaller class sizes, that was a major feature of the APA study. And so if we're going to hire more people and give them raises, the other sort of third leg of this stool is to significantly increase the standards for teacher education programs and for our hiring of teachers, highly qualified teachers.
Were those standards found lacking?
Yes, by many observers at least, the notion that we have an examination system for teacher graduates from Maryland systems and Maryland's requirements for teachers coming in from other states, that if 98% of our teachers are passing those praxis exams, that perhaps they're not rigorous enough and not challenging enough. And there's certainly a debate around that, but that was one of the conclusions drawn.
So the practice exam is not rigorous enough, not the teacher training?
Well, the teacher training, there are two aspects of the teacher training. There was the concern that even at the elementary ed level, the teacher training not require elementary education teachers to focus enough either in math or reading. So there was a desire to have those elementary education teachers coming out of the programs with a much higher level of content expertise in one of those two major subject fields. There are other states also that have an exit exam that is somewhat akin to the bar exam after law school. Delaware and other states have adopted one or the other of two nationally used exams, and so there's a recommendation that Maryland programs and candidates from out of state for Maryland positions also pass that kind of examination.
What's the responsibility level as to who provides the funding for that $3 billion that you're talking about when it comes to this? What's the breakdown of local versus state?
Well, sir, in a couple slides, I will get to that because
Okay, I'm jumping ahead. Okay.
That is the remainder. That is the out of proportion 5% of the work that they've tabled until this fall.
Okay.
And that's the subject of the letter from the Speaker and President.
So you'll get to that?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I thought you were cutting the check.
I'm not sure who's going to cut that check. That's why I'm asking the question.
I'm with you on this.
Lastly, here, I
To
want
your
to...
point, though, Commissioner Wance, we might want to try to expedite to get to that
Yep.
part of the
Yeah,
material.
'cause that's,
Okay.
okay, yep.
That is our biggest concern.
Okay. Well, then, moving right along. College and career readiness, really wanting to enact a paradigm shift of what our high schools are, to have students pass a high standard assessment at the end of 10th grade to show that they're competent in algebra and English language arts, so that they can proceed to either a CTE, career technology path, or a rigorous college prep path. More resources for high-needs students. I've already talked about this one at length. I would add that there's a concentration of poverty factor that the Kirwan Commission is recommending as well for jurisdictions with very high concentrations of free meal-eligible students. And then the fifth policy area is on governance and accountability. And this is the subject of MABE's minority report or dissenting letter to the Commission, expressing our opposition to the need for a separate and independent oversight body as essentially, from our perspective, a body that would be second-guessing the State Board of Education as it reviews our master plans and our budget alignment with what we say we're going to do in all these areas. To have another body review what they've already reviewed is not ideal or necessary or warranted in our view.
I just have to ask a question, because you mentioned algebra. The reason we went to algebra and geometry so heavy is because of Sputnik. That's exactly the reason why. There are other areas of mathematics that don't include algebra or geometry, but why aren't we looking at mathematics instead of just algebra proficiency in 10th grade? It doesn't make sense unless we're still in a space race, and we're not.
Commissioner, it's an interesting question, and one way I can answer it is that these recommendations on math proficiency represent a pretty significant shift away from Algebra 2 and in favor of algebra and geometry as a more holistic standard than just that extra level of rigor on Algebra 2, which was the holy grail for over a decade in public education. And so you had CTE students having to continue to struggle to make an Algebra 2 proficiency score, and they're trying to get away from that, and I think in viewing that Algebra 1 and geometry have more practical application for electricians and other trades people, and so that was a big part of the conversation about the proficiency
and
standards.
I realize no one here had a hand in writing this, so, but, I mean, I would much rather have taken string theory in high school rather than Algebra 2, but it wasn't offered, and it's not offered by any high schools today, but that's just the way it is. But if I had the proficiency in string theory, I'd still have math proficiency, wouldn't I?
We do have a requirement that's relatively new that you have to have 4 math classes. You have to be enrolled in a math class in each of your 4 years of high school, and that is intended to be read pretty broadly to include computer science and other classes in the field. So that's, I agree.
And I think at one point, weren't we seeing that as a gateway course to allow students then to have more possibilities beyond
Yes.
Algebra 1, beyond high school?
So much has been about kids getting to community college and not failing the AccuPlacer test, which then requires them to take a remedial English or math class for which they have to pay full price and they don't receive credit toward their AA degree. And so back mapping from that, the goal has been to set the standard where it's more aligned with what they need to pass that AccuPlacer and proceed right into success in community college. So what's happened relative to the Kirwan Commission recommendations related to those 5 policy areas? On December 18th, they received a letter from the presiding officers that said, we're going to give you more time and we don't expect you to come up with final funding recommendations prior to the 2019 session. I will say, my professional opinion, that was over-interpreted as putting the brakes on Kirwan and therefore nothing's going to happen this session. I don't think anything could be further from the truth. And talk about that in a minute as we look at these next slides, because what the Commission did was finalize action in approving their full report and then to urge the governor to include funding in the currently pending FY20 budget and to make concrete funding recommendations for FY21. And so the tables of the aggregate amount of funding, not split out between the state and counties, are all available and are all a matter of public record now. And you have these 5 chapters, if you will, on all of those 5 policy areas. That report was supposed to be done by the end of January. It's probably going to be released any day now. And so the Kirwan Commission is, again, I would say 95% done. And in looking at that, the players at the table, the Maryland Association of Counties in particular, abstained overall because those aggregate numbers were not nearly as meaningful to them as the breakout between the state and county share of those numbers. And so the 2 representatives from MACO abstained. Secretary David Brinkley voted for the report, abstaining only from the subsection of the subsection that dealt with what funding would be mandated for his boss to include in his budget next year. And so, and MABE's representative, Joy Schaefer from the Frederick County Board, voted to support the report and the recommendations with the caveat that we were going to submit a minority statement on Policy Area 5 and governance and accountability. And that's the MABE action described here, and I've distributed a copy of that letter. And so in terms of the status, they have detailed policy recommendations with total costs. They have a 10-year implementation plan for all 5 policy areas. They have made concrete funding recommendations for the pending budget year, and their report is due to be published, as I said, any day now. Specifically on the funding, there is a $200 million fund in income tax revenue that was set aside last year that is intended to be used for Kirwan, and then there is $125 million as the first installment of the more than $500 million in casino revenue that has been brought above the line, as I typically describe it, no longer nested within the state's general fund and made supplemental for public education incrementally over the next 4 fiscal years. So it'll move from 125 to 250 to 375 to 500 million and more as that casino revenue is shifted to supplemental funding for public education.
Okay.
So that's where the $325 million number comes from.
Okay, were there any specific parameters with what that money could be used for, however?
Yes, and the next slide.
See, I keep going ahead.
The power of the logical mind, right. Of course, I try to think ahead when putting the presentation together, too.
I think it's the money thing that gets me ahead. I think.
Well, yes, and so the devil's always in the details when you're talking about dollars that have M's for millions or B's for billions after them. And here, in fact, you have a really significant recommendation for expanding pre-K funding. That $29 million represents what the state estimates it would cost to fully fund the state share of the students who are currently enrolled in full-day pre-kindergarten programs. Many jurisdictions have voluntarily provided full-day pre-K in at least some schools, and a couple have done it system-wide or nearly system-wide, and so that's that $29 million. The $75 million for the teacher salary increase, that's a hotly discussed item because there was a little asterisk after it that said to require a local match, and then details to follow. And so it's to provide a 3% raise to teachers, but in terms of the specifics around whether that's a 1.5 state share, 1.5 local share, or how they propose to implement that through legislation remains to be seen, as they tell us the bill is being drafted. In the past, when there was a teacher salary challenge grant, it was optional, and local governments did provide a raise, an increase to secure the state funding. But then I'm not saying anything that isn't a matter of public record. The state funding backed off, and the locals were left being responsible for the full freight of the combined raises. And so there's that not too distant memory of how this has gone in the past, and the concern that this be done with fidelity. It's also important to keep in mind that that 3% raise, as significant as that would be for any jurisdiction, it is the first increment of the intended 10% raise for all teachers. That is a recommendation of the Kirwan Commission. And so whether that's a 3, 3, and 4, or a 3, 4, and 3, you have to get to 10 somehow, and the goal is to do that over the course of 3 years. When I say the goal, it's the goal of some advocates. It's a stated goal of some leadership and members of the work group on high-quality teachers and leaders. But it obviously will have to be managed in the fiscal reality trenches for both local boards and county governments across the state.
Whenever I hear details will follow, I think we all get nervous about that.
Now, so you're saying with this is the 50-50 match, 50% local. Are the other items also, I keep hearing Kirwan thinks everything ought to be 50-50. Is that true, or is it just this portion?
Well, in this case, sure, it's just this portion. So that $29 million is not match funding. Concentration of poverty grants, not match funding, so that's 100% state. Yes, yes, and similarly, it's the state commitment to significantly increase special education funding.
Yes.
And that's actually intended to allow us. I'm afraid to say it out loud because it was so nice to hear them do it, to allow us to supplant and so to use that state funding to provide the high-quality special education services we believe we are providing, and to make other money available for other purposes, which is a rare thing to be allowed to do. And so, but no, it is the teacher salary increase, the grant that's being discussed is that 50-50. I will say overall, the formulas, though, continue to work in that wealth equalized manner. So where you stand relative to the other jurisdictions in terms of wealth, you're going to get less of your regular ed per pupil share and your weights, and then have to make up the difference or not at the local level.
And that's a problem in Carroll County.
Is the $2.6 million coming in from the state now part of this from the Kirwan?
No, that's our, that have to be Mike.
You should be. Thanks, John.
This may be the only time in my career that I could ever know something John Willems didn't already know. They're referring to our preliminary report.
Mark it down.
Maybe he's just being nice.
No, he knows almost everything. The commissioner referred to our preliminary state money under the current governor's preliminary budget. So that money's following the 2002 to current formulas, the Thornton formula, and so no, it doesn't have any bearing on what may come in the future.
Okay. Thanks.
So let me, I'm a little challenged by that, not your last statement, John. That one's good. So Thornton still comes into play here when it comes to a 50-50 match to any teacher compensation. Is that correct? Because that's the current formula? Or are they changing that formula? Because you said it would be based on current formulas as to what county gets what.
So Commissioner, there's no way I was going to be speaking to this esteemed audience and not mention maintenance of effort at some point. The Kirwan Commission has not recommended any change to maintenance of effort. So if you're a high wealth county and you're therefore getting a low per pupil amount, from the state relative to your wealth, there is no obligation that you do more than maintenance of effort requires based on your last year's highest appropriation on a per pupil basis. So there are high wealth counties that have maintained a very low level of local funding. There are high wealth counties that have consistently increased their local funding and supplement the state funding significantly. And similarly, there are low wealth jurisdictions that receive quite a bit of state funding, and 75 or 80% of their budget, and some significantly enhance that based on maxing out their piggyback income tax rate, et cetera, and others do not. There's no obligation, in other words, to do any more than you did in the previous year on a per pupil basis. And the Kirwan Commission is not recommending to change maintenance of effort, modify it in any way.
But the teacher salary increase is 50-50 irregardless of wealth.
This initial proposal for the $75 million to provide a 3% raise referred to the local match. And in the past, it was a one-for-one, 50-50 match. But in testifying in support of these recommendations, I will say there were a panel of people, including the teachers' unions and others, and there was no consensus as to what they thought that meant. And so it doesn't have to be 50-50. It could be the state's going to provide 2% for 1% from the locals. But I don't want to give anyone false hope that 50-50 isn't probably the best we're going to see.
Yes.
Okay, but it's maybe a floor of what we would see. That the county would, the state would provide 1.5 of an intentional 3% raise. That's the minimum that they would provide, that we should expect them to provide.
It's so difficult to speculate, but we have jurisdictions, Somerset County, where they have such a high rate of poverty. They're providing 100% of their students with free lunches. Their state share of a school construction project is basically 100%. And so to require a Somerset County to come up with a match to give their teachers a raise relative to other jurisdictions, if they can't come up with that funding, the concern for MABE and other advocates would be the inequity that would impose upon them if the counties around them are able to muster the will or the way to provide that raise, and our lowest wealth jurisdictions. It's not that they don't have the will, they don't have the way. They don't have the wealth to tap to provide that.
Which is what Kirwan was supposed to work on. Sorry, that's the Mako coming out in me. Sorry. But therein lies the challenge here.
Details to follow.
But perhaps, I mean, this is the right time to insert the comment of, with the legislative session going on right now, this teacher salary increase and at least a 1.5% allocation from the state for our county is something that we should all be kind of rallying support around.
There's no doubt.
Right.
I'm not challenging that at all. I'm only challenged by the fact that many of the things that you were saying are the things that should have been looked at as being repaired by Kirwan, and it's not. They're adding a whole burden of challenges to local jurisdictions and haven't given us any assistance in how we're going to get to those, how we're going to meet those challenges. That's the problem, and this is a perfect example of that. And hopefully if that comes to fruition, great, and hopefully everything can come together and we're good there. But across the state, it's very unfair.
Basically, they're saying every county in the state should be following this, but not every county has, it's different. Carroll County is different than Garrett when it comes to wealth.
Well, which is why Kirwan was put into place.
Right.
So, enough of that. I get it, and certainly we've seen, I was privy to some of the testimony yesterday or the day before when they appeared in front of specifically the House, and the Senate, I believe. Interesting, the House had a lot more questions than the Senate did, a lot more pointed questions, which I thought were good. But again, really no answers. It was just a whole lot of, back around to where we came from, so.
Well, if I could, in conclusion, I would say that MABE and MACO have worked very collaboratively over the years and continue to do so. I'm attending the MACO Education Subcommittee meeting tomorrow in Annapolis. And I raised that because there have been a number of patches or adjustments to Thornton that need to be maintained and thought about. The hold harmless grants, the guaranteed tax base grant for the low wealth jurisdictions that maintain a high tax effort, the GCEI or other programs, and we've seen it on the school construction side too. So there are ways to help jurisdictions with less resources, and there are ways to benefit the jurisdictions that are really crowded and have too many relocatable classrooms and whatnot. And so that one Maryland solution, because the declining enrollment issue is an issue for many counties with very different makeups and demographics and sort of socioeconomic facts on the ground, from Carroll County to Baltimore City and beyond. And there needs to be a statewide holistic look at that and way to address that. And MACO and MABE are definitely committed to working toward that.
Yeah, and we appreciate that too, so thank you. Yeah. I wasn't yelling at you, I was yelling with you, okay?
You're just the messenger, right?
And you certainly won't get any arguments from me about the purpose of what Kirwan was supposed to initially be.
Right, and that's been the whole challenge up to this point. Matter of fact, the governor's budget this year includes some monies for Baltimore City and Caroline.
Cecil.
Is it Cecil? I thought, okay.
I believe,
for the declining enrollment issue.
Yes.
And again, that was something that Kirwan was supposed to try to assist with, so that we wouldn't have those pockets of funding just to those jurisdictions that are experiencing that issue.
Right. Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
But still very much needed, so until there's a better solution.
Well, right. Well, this is...
Your predictions for Carroll County. Your predictions for Carroll County with this whole mess.
That's loaded.
You might want to get up and run right now. Okay? I'm telling you what to do.
That was nice.
You got 3 doors. Run.
Based on experience with the Thornton ramp up, the concerns are with the best intentions, that there's a public-private partnership and that there are available high-quality private slots. For instance, past experience would say that in rural areas where there's limited capacity of high-quality early education opportunities, the burden then falls to the public school system to expand facilities and hire staff and take on a larger role of that responsibility themselves. And if we saw that with full-day K and pre-K here in Carroll County in the mid-2000s, it would seem likely that we would see that again with any significant expansion of pre-K moving forward. And so that's why they call me Mr. Sunshine. It was not a rosy prediction, but I just tried to identify something that based in experience could come to pass and have a real significant impact on operating capital budgets going forward.
I'm definitely very interested in seeing some of the accountability measures as they get finalized as well, because I think part of the problem is that we don't hold, like Carroll County, I think we've got a very good accountability threshold, and we have a new strategic plan in place. We're a very highly rated school system. We deliver. The money that we invest for our kids, we deliver on those results. And there are a lot of other counties who don't. They are given gobs and gobs of money from the state, and there's not really a whole lot to show for it. And so there needs to be accountability measures in place and repercussions to missing those accountability measures.
And on a positive note, I should have pointed out that adequate funding for high-quality career technology education opportunities, that section of the Commission's work, we feel gave really a short shrift to the funding and to say that we can expand CTE with existing resources, with the challenges I know that Carroll faces in expanding career technology education opportunities and building facilities to provide those services. The state needs to step up and fund those facilities and the staffing required to support those if they mean what they say and want us to be more like Switzerland and provide really world-class CTE opportunities for our kids.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good seeing you.
I knew that was going to take time.
Again. We'll
That's,
see you
you know,
again.
That's front and center on many of the things that we're going to be discussing in the coming weeks, so it's important, so.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of unknowns still at this point as we're launching into legislative session, but I think that the one thing that we really do need to have some focus and direction behind is the teacher salary increase, the 3%. If there's, at least 50% of that coming from the state, we need to kind of galvanize all of our interested stakeholders and get down and push for that piece of it.
Okay.
Thank you. As I stated earlier, we thought a brief historical perspective, specifically as it relates to enrollment and funding, Carroll County Public Schools. John O'Neill and Chris Hartlove are here, and again, encourage conversation and questions as we go.
That's right, and we will be brief, and unlike Ted Zaleski, I do not work alone. I need a sidekick.
As he get drunk.
I need help. And so we thought when we sat down with Ted and Roberta and planned, we thought, given that many of you are new or some of you are new, maybe just a little brief look backward to bring us forward would perhaps be helpful to kind of get us to where we sit today. It's, in a weird way, I think it kind of dovetails to what John just presented, because he's sort of looking at where the state may go, and we're going to take a brief look as to where we've been relative to the state, or because of the state, if you will. So some of this repeats from the agency, but I'm going to do them real quick. So you saw this slide the other day from Dr. Lockhart, and just as a refresher, because funding isn't based on it, the formulas you were just asking Mr. Williams about, these are our enrollment actuals in blue, so those are real student enrollment numbers, and in the tan or yellow or whatever color that would be to you are our projections going forward. And Steve said the other day we peaked in '05, and then you see that sharp decline, and what we're going to get to there is the impact that meant for state aid or state funding. The projections going forward show us looking much better than we have been in a decade, and I think that's a good thing for both of us and puts us on a little better footing going forward. Real quickly, we didn't do this the other day, we wanted to do it now. We get a lot of questions over time about how accurate our projections are, and we've done hours and hours of painful presentations on that over time, and those are available online, or we could send them, but here's a real quick one-page summary. Pretty accurate, really accurate, especially within a 5-year range, and still accurate within a 10-year range. And all of that to say, I think we can sort of count on this slide and those tan bars, that we seem to have finally hit the bottom. We are statistically flat and starting to hopefully tick up in enrollment over the next few years. So that bad period of time, that steep line down, hopefully is in the rear view, and there's certainly evidence to support that. Here in the next slide, this is what you saw the other day. We're going to have the detail on this in the next slide. This shows that picture of what that decline in enrollment, because most of our loss in state aid was driven by the decline in enrollment. There were some issues with relative wealth and some of those weighted student areas that John mentioned, but largely it was enrollment. And again, just as a kind of the big picture view, the blue bar shows all of state funding going up for all of Maryland over time for education. The red line shows our actual funding marks, and we're going to spell that out. And the green line shows where we would have been if we had simply remained steady from our highest point of state funding, which was fiscal year 2009. And here is a look at those in terms of real numbers. So the real number would be our all-time peak in state education funding was fiscal year 9. We received $139 million and some change from Maryland. And then the second column beyond fiscal year, change from prior year, shows the actual dollar amount difference up or down in state aid from the prior year to the next. So in 10, we lost $2,394,723 in actual state aid. And then the third column of the math, the change from FY9, shows the difference in our state aid for that year from our high point in FY09 to that year. So for instance, you can see in the year we're sitting in, fiscal year 19, we're being funded at $10,498 or $271 less than we were funded in fiscal year 9 from the state. And then the last column is kind of just counting that cumulative total, that loss in state aid. So if you add it all up on top of itself over time, $79 million plus in lost cumulative aid. So we thought that the graph we showed the other day is a nice broad representation, but if you really want to get to the heart of the matter, here that is. Now, some good news. I guess a couple of points, especially based on last presentation. You see fiscal year 12 was better than the rest. That year, we believe, had a lot to do with relative wealth. Our free and reduced meal enrollment went up for us, and we hit a little peak there, and so that's one of the weighted student per pupil factors. The more farms or free and reduced meal kids you have, the more aid you receive per pupil from the state. And Chris and I were trying to pull out the old data, and I didn't quite get there before we walked over, but we think in that year, we lost in relative wealth, so our ranking probably dropped a notch or two relative to the other 23 jurisdictions, and we actually didn't suffer. We actually picked up $246,000 a year. So we have one anomalous year way back then. Those recent years where the numbers are black instead of red began to reflect the state hold harmless legislation. And so thank you to District 5 Delegate Krebs, Rose Shoemaker, and Senator Reedy for making that happen, because that's helped stem that tide. It certainly hasn't closed that cliff. You can see what those numbers are, but it did matter for us locally. And I think it probably helped you help our efforts, because one of the themes we want to get to here is we've struggled to get through this. Some of you weren't here, but you as a body have struggled to sort of first make up the loss in state aid to just get us back to zero, and then work on trying to fund us in any way going forward. And so that's kind of a picture here as well. There's been these mutual challenges we faced. We have a full document on our webpage for anybody who might want to look at it. It's under Chris Hartlove's offices, of all of the things that we as a Board of Ed, or the Board of Ed, did to try to reduce expenditures to help make up that difference, that loss in state aid, inflation, et cetera. Here are some of the highlights, all of them for those of us who were here. Very painful and difficult to go through, but they do sort of tell this. There's many more. These are sort of the big ticket items, but they do kind of tell the stories. Everything from the school closures, a total of 375.7 positions eliminated, most of those through attrition, but still positions eliminated. We basically reduced our maintenance budget to zero, more or less, out of our operating budget. So we're relying a whole lot on capital funding there. We took 40 buses off the road by reworking bus schedules and tiers in FY13, and that saved more than $1 million, and then some of the other areas. But just a little bit of a memory there of kind of what the Board of Ed was working on in those years. Dr. Locker showed this slide the other day, and I'm going to put it back there because you saw it, but I'm going to skip ahead because we wanted to take the extra minute today to kind of highlight a point. He showed just the rankings. The next slide, which hopefully shows up okay on the screen, takes those rankings and shows you county by county, shows you the enrollment, it shows you the ratio. So this is the data behind where we pulled those rankings from. And the point that Dr. Locker made in the brief minute the other day was the Board of Ed tried really hard during those years. We certainly reduced teaching positions, there's no doubt about it, but we tried to consistently reduce teaching positions that would maintain our staff-student ratio. So as enrollment declined, we sort of had a staff-student ratio back in fiscal year 9. We tried to reduce the number of teaching positions that maintain a consistent range of that staff-student ratio over time. And we think that was a really good thing to do and the right thing to do. And you can see that we've held our relative rank there. So today, or this is the most recent data we can get from MSDE, from the Maryland State Department of Ed. So it's actually based on 17 enrollment numbers. They haven't published 18 yet. But where we sit today is ranked 10th in the state in student-teacher ratio. And we would say that's very much a positive. That's not an area to look at. That's something we struggled and fought to try to maintain, and that's great. The next column is basically administrators, or the next section there, non-instructional staff. So I'm going to skip that to get to the last two sections, classroom aides and other instructional personnel. This is kind of why we wanted to take another moment to go back through this, and I think it's going to relate a whole lot to what Dr. Lockhart and the board have to say after we're finished here. Those are kind of the collective categories of employees in Maryland schools that surround the teacher and provide them support in the classroom. Directly in the classroom with aides providing different support, for instance, special education assistants would be one of those position types that makes up that area. And then other instructional personnel would be all of the other professional level support that you can surround a teacher with. And as you can see, what we weren't able to do was make ground there or sustain ground that we had. And so we rank, I don't know how else to say it nicely, but we rank very poorly relative to our other school systems. And so when the superintendent holds town halls and we hear from employees, we always hear about compensation, and we always will. But we also hear people saying, I need help with caseload. I need help with some of these student behavior needs. I need help with these kinds of things as a teacher. And so that's been a large part of the strategic planning process the board has been through before and since Dr. Lockhart has arrived as well. Salary. I wanted to spend just a second on salary. And at this point, based on where we've been historically with salary, really the only true apples to apples comparison, and we really didn't want to present numbers that would allow any person out there to engage in a debate over what those numbers mean. So really the only true apples to apples comparison at this point is average teacher salary. And so this table is designed to take a look at those same fiscal years and show you what our average salary was and where that ranked in the state of the 24 districts for that fiscal year. And then there's the state average for that fiscal year, and the last column is where Carroll was, where we were relative to that state average number in whole dollar amounts. And so you could see over the earlier years when the recession hit, when enrollment started going down initially, and the state aid numbers started really plummeting from that earlier slide, we started losing ground, and we lost ground pretty quickly and ended up going from 9th to 23rd in rank by fiscal year 15. The last 3 years of our negotiated salary increase, we've made up some of that difference, at least in terms of rank. So we've gotten back to 17th, which is where we sat in 2013. But in terms of a whole dollar amount, that last column haven't really made up, that kind of ground. And so I think, boards of ed, this one and prior one, the superintendents as well, have talked about prioritizing salary. For us, it's really about, how can we work here not to lose further ground, to maintain this, to continue to be competitive as we look forward, because you can see where we've been in the past. Did want to say one thing about the question that you had for John Willems prior, the match, the Kerwin match. If that comes to be, when there's a bill, we expect that to be additional funding on top of the $2.6 million under the Thornton formula. So if that $2.6 million holds, we should get that under the formula. We would expect to see another bill for the teacher grant match. And that would be from the $200 million that was set aside that John remarked upon in last session based on income tax revenue. So more than the 2.6, which I think was one of the questions you had.
And is that reflected in the next slide?
In the next slide. No, that would not be reflected in anywhere here.
Well, I'm going to jump ahead.
The last
So
slide?
the bottom line on that next slide.
The final slide?
Yeah, would be the additional 2.6 subtracted from that?
Well, no, this slide this slide brings it to the local level. So this is a state, we were switching gears at the end to.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead.
To give you all the local conversation. So you certainly can have that conversation board to board. Lastly, we wanted to sort of take a look at recent years. So not all the way back to fiscal year 9, but more recent years. And so these years of funding that we're looking at here actually reflect the years that Commissioners Frazier, Wentz, and Weaver have been on the Board of Commissioners. We did want to start with a baseline so that there was a number to work from. So there's, for fiscal year 15, the 171,037,000, that's the number that was adopted for the Board of Ed in your budget. And so there's your starting point to look at these last few years. And then over the 4 years that followed 15, what the chart tries to do, so I'll sort of work through FY16 just to explain what a column means. And because we sit at this weird moment between when Dr. Lockers presented his recommended budget to the board, but they haven't adopted a budget yet that would become a request to you, we just went with the superintendent's proposed amount because we don't have a Board of Ed amount for fiscal year 20. So with that in mind, looking at 16, superintendent at the time proposed a budget that would have sought a $180,201,824 request from the county. That would have been $9,164,824 over the prior year's funding. And so that amount would have represented a 5.36% increase in local revenue to the Board of Ed. Ultimately, what the Board of Commissioners adopted was a funding amount of $176,202,000. And that was in actuality a $5,165,000 increase for the Board of Ed over the prior year, that 171,037 number. And it reflected a 3%, a 3.02% increase in local funding to the Board of Ed. And so I don't want to painfully read every column to you, but that's sort of the pattern here. So it looks, starting at 15 as a base, it looks at what happened, what was requested at the superintendent's level in 16, what ultimately was funded in 17, 18, 19, and then the beginning part of where we sit today in 20. And, you know, what struck us as we were sitting down with the new superintendent and working this out is really there's a pretty consistent pattern where you've been working hard to be consistent in your effort to us, and so we appreciate that. And that sort of is where I end. Set the stage for I guess, Dr. Lockwood to take from here.
Do you have anything to show what you requested, the superintendent's proposal from the state and what they actually gave?
Well,
I know you see what on that one slide what the state gave, but what was the request to the state during those years?
So we don't make a request to state because it's all formula driven. So we wait for, it's no different than this year. We wait for the governor to submit a budget, and then we see what those numbers filter through DLS and MSD to us look like. And so
all the requests for increases basically comes to us?
We certainly fought over those years.
I
celebrated the hold harmless as it looked wherever here. There were a lot of years prior to that where many people, representatives from the commissioners, Chris and I and others were down in Annapolis saying we are in desperate need of some type of a hold harmless. It took that many years for it to happen. Sure. But the formula has been the formula since 2002.
Right, so the process is formula and legislation. So every year we get the formula updated, but we're also working behind the scenes trying to advocate for anything that's good for us. We're doing that at the same time. And I think we've had some success, as John is referring to.
This was really meant to be a positive ending, like
you never go to
the bad years are.
But you never go to the state delegation and say, we're looking for this amount of money. If you could find a way to get us a little bit more of this money, that way the county doesn't have to foot the whole bill. That's never happened?
We certainly had those conversations, and then they would temper what they might be able to make happen. And we had differing degrees of success before the actual hold harmless. I can remember Chris and I sitting in then Senators Brinkley and Getty's offices talking about a hold harmless, and there were years where it made it through the Senate but not the House, and years where we got halfway there, but it was just 3 years ago when we finally got all the way there.
And the difference, I think, between our process with you, with the commissioners, and our process with the state is we're one of many at the state. So anything we do, they have to kind of balance the impact of how it's going to impact other school systems versus the commissioners. We're the only school system.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're one of many with the state, but not with our delegation.
Right.
Honestly, and this is just a me perspective, and I'm sure others would disagree down there. It took some years before the state would even acknowledge what we were saying was a problem. And then they started listening to us, and it got momentum for a couple of legislative cycles, but it didn't pass. And then I think years of work and the fact that some other systems fell into the same category with us all came together that year to make it happen for us. And the city was a big
Right, if the city didn't need $20 million, we wouldn't have gotten afford it.
But we'll rise with that tide, so.
Right.
You're right, but we were happy to get that.
Yeah, I'm delighted to get it for the county, but if it wasn't for the city, we wouldn't have gotten it. That's all I have to, and that's the way it is.
No doubt.
From the proposed budget from last year, or any year, to what was then provided by the Board of Commissioners, that delta, the associated risk associated with that delta and what was actually missed, like what was not gained from that $5 million or $5.5 million, is that been broken down? So
Yeah,
either
there
some
were-
of it's been rolled over for this proposal, or is it?
Some of it certainly has. A common theme would have been behavior specialists, positions who would serve the needs of students who demonstrated certain behavior aspects that are interfering with the instructional program, the program for all students. So there would be, Commissioners, some items that carried forward. There would be some that didn't. I would say that what is significantly different today in this request is that the board at that time had not developed sort of a system-wide strategic plan, and,
Okay.
and this board and the board prior were working on that. And as Dr. Lockard came on board, that came to be a living, breathing document with hopefully data to support it and some clear, I feel like I shouldn't be speaking and you should, but clear prioritized system needs. And so there's a little more, I think, research and evaluation meet to what's before you now. But some of those things have repeated for multiple
Okay,
years.
no, and-
Special educators has been a big issue for years.
And don't you think on this chart, that's a reason why the instructional assistants and stuff, we've lost ground?
Yeah, I don't think it's an accident, and it was never intentional. There wasn't a meeting.
No,
I don't know why I
but
can't.
we were getting less money and something had to go away.
Right, I need one more.
Right. We were also still cutting positions.
We were cutting positions over all of those years. And so there was never a meeting where we said, this chart should inform the strategic plan, but it's a natural outgrowth, I think, of where we are in our organization, that those last two columns would really mainly reflect what's in the budget request in terms of support.
Are SROs reflected in this?
They are not. The SROs you have funded through the sheriff's office, and so we appreciate that, and I think our staff works very closely, Ms. Dolce included, at the high school level, with sheriff and his command staff, but you're funding those positions through the staff, and we're grateful to provide some input on who gets housed where. We're benefiting, and we certainly are in concert on placing those SROs in our schools and that sort of thing, but that's a sheriff command decision.
The way you described it was well done. Moving forward, understanding the value, the gain for what we're paying for, and then also, more importantly, the risk associated with what's not being paid for, and how that's going to roll over to next year and the out years, because it's not, it's like an earthquake. It's not 7.1 to 7.2, it's just 0.1. It's a magnitude. And my concern is that there are risks associated when we don't pay for something that gets a magnitude of risk greater than just rolling it over for the next year. Those are the type of discussions that I think are going to be important moving forward. And I think, like you were working towards, is tied to your strategic vision. As long as you got the vision, you know where you want to go, then you'll know, hey, we're funding to where we want to go, or if we don't get funding, here's the risk associated, and this is what's going to happen in the next few years, which is much greater than if we paid for it today. So,
Commissioner Rothstein, I could not agree with you more. I mean,
I
that was
appreciate that.
actually one of the specific things that we were trying to address with building the strategic plan for the school system. So we do have the 5-year
Good.
strategic plan. We've built in specific measures of success and things that we're working towards over the next 5 years. I think there's still some work to be done there, right? There are some measures that I think are missing from the strategic plan. But as Mr. O'Neill said, it's a living, breathing document
Right.
that we're continuing to work on. So we do need to get still some more specifics into that plan. But we're looking at everything from, we've started coining the phrase return on achievement, right? Instead of return on investment, return on achievement, basically saying, look, this is the measure that we're missing on, and we need to put resource towards that, and this is the measure that we're targeting. We expect to get this return on the investment in that, and if we don't fund it, then these are the repercussions.
and here's the risk. So absolutely, return on investment to risk associated with not getting funding. So, good.
And I think it's not that time of the year yet, but capital budget, again, if we keep cutting back on building maintenance, we're gonna pay the price one day. And that's exactly what you're saying.
So I get all that. That all sounds great. where are you with putting numbers to this strategic plan? And we've got a 5-year balanced budget here, 6, some would say, but you guys don't. So it often, that's where we get into the issues with what can we do for you. So I get that strategic plan, that's great. But I think you got to put the numbers to it in order for us to be able to do what we do here as well. And gosh, it would make it a lot easier if we worked hand in hand there.
And Commissioner, I agree with you as well on the, you have the 5-year plan. We pretty much put up a 1-year number every year, right?
Exactly.
And so we don't necessarily know how that's going to play out, right? I mean, this is ongoing funds. We need to make sure that we're not creating a structural imbalance somewhere.
Right.
And
it doesn't lock you
understand how
in,
that
but at
plays
least
out.
it would give you a better idea of where you're going to be.
Right. And to be honest
so-
with you, I think that stems from lack of trust between two boards in the past, right? So if you present a 5-year number and you say, okay, well, that's the number that we're locking into, but I think there needs to be an understanding.
That was
between
in the
our two boards.
past, okay?
Right, but
I understand.
And that's one of the reasons for this meeting, right, is to try to build the trust and the collaboration between our two boards so we can get there. I think we should start working towards a 5-year plan as well, because we are 50% of the county's budget, so.
Is this strategic plan in print, or what? You all keep talking about this
Absolutely.
strategic plan.
It absolutely is.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
You can
Okay.
access it on our website,
Okay.
but, go ahead.
I just, before you go any further on that, where do we rank in the state for the thousands of viewers here viewing in on this for our school system in Carroll County?
We're at the top in just about every measure as it relates to the report card that just came out from MSDE. We have a lot to be proud of here.
So we are at the top of the state as far as most of the areas here in Carroll County, which is something I think we ought to be very proud of. And we have to keep it there, and we know that. And, that's on what makes us top of the state. A lot of the programs you have, our teachers, our classroom staff, we know that. So I appreciate where you guys are here, and now getting back to our strategic plan,
Sure.
I think we have to be able to work on this together to make those numbers match as we go ahead. And
No, I appreciate you saying that, Commissioner Weaver. It is a challenge, as Ms. Savigny said, when we kind of look year to year. The plan actually caused us to take a look at this budget a little bit differently, which is why you saw some of those positions in there. Now, let me say this for the record, and for everybody here for sure. First and foremost, the salary piece for our employees is critical, having competitive salaries. I want to attract the best. I want to keep the best here in Carroll County Public Schools, standing in front of our students and supporting our students each and every day. So that's going to be a large part of that budget proposal that I'm bringing forward for our board for them to consider. But I want to clarify that I fully recognize and anticipating that adding 29 positions is probably not achievable. We did that because we wanted to consider those things. We took a long time to gather feedback from all over the county. I've been to town halls and employee meetings and advocacy group functions and you name it, and I've been listening. And I've especially been listening to our teachers who, along with compensation, I also hear right behind that, I need help. Our service caseload is larger. We have different needs than we did 10 years ago. There are greater challenges. And so when we looked at our plan, we tried to put together some things to at least consider as we move forward. And whether we get one of those positions to consider next year, or some of those positions to consider next year, or even none of those positions to consider next year, we already know what our needs are, and we've started to map that out as we know what the priorities are in terms of supports out in our classroom. It's not by accident that they all fall within that category where we rank 23rd out of 24th either. That's where they all are, school-based, supporting teachers and students. And so I'm being realistic. I'm trying to be as realistic as I can about, I understand your challenges and our collective challenges, and I'm trying to be as practical about that as I can. At a minimum, the budget tries not to cut any more positions.
So you see, for me, and this is just me now, and this is the 5th year that I've been here, good or bad. But when you bring us numbers like that, then the public perception is, okay, so the Board of County Commissioners is not able to fund the Carroll County Public Schools. That's their immediate response. So it puts us in a precarious place. And I'm a little bit disappointed in the fact that you're even putting those positions in there. For me, it's always been about getting our teachers the correct compensation, period. So secondary, that would have been great. And, you know, oh, by the way, but out of the gate, I'm disappointed that you brought a proposed budget that includes positions, when the emphasis should be on, everything should be on school-based personnel.
Let me respond to that a minute. That positions that you've added are different than they were 10 years ago. Our school system, our elementary teachers have a different focus with kids than they did 10 years ago. And you're probably more aware of this than everything.
I'm very aware of it because I've got one in the house.
Yes, and, you know, those kids coming in have different needs than the kids did very few
Which
years
is
ago.
why our teachers should be compensated more.
Yes, I don't agree, don't disagree
Unfortunately, a
with
lot of
you.
the teachers don't
The
have the
emphasis should be
time.
on
But
compensation.
they need
The
help too,
one-on-one.
they need
A lot of
support.
these kids do need the
But But
one-on-one
also, Dr.
assistance.
Buckard, and I could be wrong, I'm new and still learning. All 29 are in-school positions, correct?
Right.
Yeah,
They
none
are
of them
school-based
are-
Yeah,
personnel.
they're
are
in
out-
schools.
All of them are in school helping the teachers, which I still understand, they're new positions, but, and I know, I heard from so many people, we need psychologists, we need behavior specialists at
Let's
that level.
just agree to disagree on that,
Oh, I
because we're not all
understand.
going to agree. But I'm telling you right now, for me, you know, we have been putting an emphasis on this, and, you know, I can remember a board before the last board that was talking about maintenance of effort. And we have far exceeded that, and we have always put an emphasis on compensation. So that's just me speaking. I'm having a tough time with, oh, by the way, we want to add 29 positions.
I have to say something about this right now, because Dick and I have been in education for over 40 years, and I am telling you right now, Mr. Wance and Commissioners, I am in those classrooms. Those elementary school teachers need help. And we have cut, and I have to thank Mr. Hartlove and his crew for doing an unbelievable job of cutting for the last several years. And we cut teachers, but I am telling you that we do have a priority of our teachers being compensated, but we also see that our teachers need to be compensated in the classroom, because we are dealing with a different type of child now, and we almost are parents to some of those children. And whether you're disappointed or not in those positions, those elementary teachers need help. And I am glad that we put those in there because of the situation and the crisis in the elementary school system. And we have cut for so many years. It's time to step up, and we need to help those elementary teachers.
How many of those 29 positions are contract 101s or contract IAs in the elementary school?
The elementary ones,
Because you just talked about IAs and so forth, so how many of them are contract 101s or contract IAs? Because that's what really would help the teachers in elementary schools.
Yeah, we'd have to look at that, but I would like to.
Well, anybody? None of them are. Okay.
With all due respect, though, Commissioner Fraser, there's been a
Go
lot
ahead.
of discussions about what are the positions that we need to focus on to help the teachers
Okay.
most. So
I still teach.
I
know where the
understand
help
that you
is
still
needed.
teach.
And I'm telling you,
But we
the
have
contract
followed a
101s and
process,
contract
Commissioner
IAs
Fraser.
are what the elementary schools, and even the middle schools where I'm teaching right now, I'm teaching the best program over there. And, well, I don't want to go into all that, but the
But
contract
I just
101s
wanted
and
to
IAs
make
is what we
a
need.
point, and not to cut anyone off, I just wanted to make the point that we feel our job is to realistically share what our needs are in the school system. Certainly, we have as a priority the compensation of our teachers and of our staff members, because we all acknowledge that that's the number one bang for the buck, you know, the quality of the teacher that we have in the classroom. So we certainly want to support and make sure that we're putting the best and keeping the best in front of our students. So that certainly is our number one priority. And secondly, again, it is trying to meet the needs of the students. And again, I know that we are looking at these 29 positions. I mean, it's not really that it's super frosting on the cake, so to speak. I mean, that these are positions that can really help impact the instruction that's going on in the classroom. We're acknowledging you know, we'd like to get everything that we're asking for, but we know the position we're in now. We certainly are willing to negotiate and compromise.
And we get all that.
It's a two-pronged approach.
With all due respect to your comment, I know you're in the schools. I hear it every single day.
And I see I go down there because that is one of my
Every
schools.
single day. I don't know if you're in the schools every single day, but I hear it every single day. And you know what I hear? Teacher compensation.
So the one thing.
And I agree on that.
Okay, I'm gonna raise my hand.
He was a good student.
So, which kind of gets into that line. I think we gotta back out of this for a second. You shared that we're doing really well in the schools. We're ranking very high with the skills that we're providing, the education in the schools. It does become a double-edged sword when you do not have a strategic vision and long-term processes, because folks will say, why am I funding this if we're doing so well? You know, and it becomes very contentious in position to position. I think where you're going with the strategic vision and with that out-year look is really going to help. And we're not going to have to nickel and dime positions, but we're going to be looking at the intent of the budget over the out years. Because I think part of this with these positions is it'd be easier to identify if we do not fund something today, like these positions, what will be the impact over the next 3 to 5 years. And it may be much greater because it'll be at the other school systems, the high schools or whatever, and we'll be able to identify it earlier on. Again, it's the return on investment, whatever you said it was, and then the risk associated with not funding something. But we've got to get past the tactical problem we have and look at the strategic, you know, focus. It's not going to take away from where we're at with these 29 positions today, but I think moving forward, if we're working that in concert together, we're going to get past nickel and dime positions.
So I think the one thing is with these positions is, I mean, we've all seen it, we need to look at it, we've been in the schools, we talk to the principals, we see the resources that are there, and the one thing we constantly keep hearing is we need to make sure these students are math and reading ready, and if they're not, that achievement level going down the road is going to make our school system not at the top anymore. So if we don't invest in those two academic positions that we do definitely need, then our achievement level is going to go down as a county. So that's something I do think we need to very well look into. I've seen the emails from many teachers I'm getting every single day of what they would like to see. Yes, it's compensation, but it is assistance in their classrooms for these students.
Steve, did you want to finish or not? I mean, you got cut off a little bit there, so. And I know there's more to come on this.
I think these are the discussions that we need to be having.
Yes. Right,
I mean,
right.
They're not easy conversations,
Right.
but they need to be had. And so I appreciate all the comments that are going back and forth today. And I think, commissioners, all of you, if you've had a chance to see some of our prior meetings, and Commissioner Weaver, you've been there for some of them, you'll see that we aren't necessarily all completely in agreement on the way to spend the money and what of the 29 positions that have been identified, what are the most important of those 29. I think one of the things that, there are a couple of things that you guys don't necessarily have an appreciation for, and because we haven't been talking openly, and one is that we do have a significant focus on teacher compensation. There are a lot of things going on behind the scenes right now that we simply can't talk about because it's part of the negotiated process. But I want you to be aware that those things are going on. Don't think that we don't have a focus on those, okay? The 29 positions, yeah, exactly. The 29 positions, I think, is just exactly what Dr. Lockard was saying, is that we're evaluating the entire system and saying, look, as we look at our strategic vision, we think these are the things that we would identify first. But I don't think you've heard, and this is by design, I don't think you've heard from any of our board members screaming at the commissioners saying, you're not doing a good enough job, right?
Not yet.
Just one of them.
Don got in trouble for complimenting.
I did. I've gotten beat up really badly.
I don't know, John did a pretty good job about 20 minutes ago, saying, you know, you've all done a good job, so.
I mean, we recognize that the difficulty has come at the state level, where that number has been flat or down for many years, and you guys have made up the difference.
Right, and I get all that.
And we understand that. We're simply looking at the strategic vision. We have a strategic vision and saying, look, if we're gonna start, once we can get past this point of having to cut, where is the next place that we need to invest in the school system to make sure that we stay ranked #1 in the state? So it's all with that kind of focus. And we're trying to align all of our requests to the strategic plan and say, look, this is how we would be using those positions. This is how we're going to use that investment if we have it.
It's a good product. This summary, whoever did the analysis.
We tried to do exactly what you sort of laid out.
That's awesome.
The people in this room are stuck making all the decisions. The state comes in, that's great, but it's on us here to make these decisions. And I like the fact that we throw everything out on the table. We know what you need in the future now, if possible, but in the future, we know what our, I think, top priority is. I think Commissioner Wance mentioned that. We need compensation for the classroom. And the fact is, we're sitting here talking about it. And not losing our temper, but we are discussing it, and that's needed, and we need more of it. And we do need to see the figures on this, I think, to now go to the next step.
And quite frankly, to be honest, we are in a better place here than our surrounding jurisdictions. You know, I talked to my colleague in Hartford County last night, and they're having a difficult time there. Baltimore County, difficult time. Is there a word beyond difficult? Educators?
Raise your hand.
Yeah, I'm raising my hand. Mr. Wance, I do understand that we've never, ever, as long as I can remember, ever did a 5-year budget, and I understand that. And I think that is something we really need to look at on this side of the table, because then you also have an idea of what we're looking at the future. And I think that's something that the board needs to look at and to go with our strategic plan. And I do understand that. So that's something that we, as our, on this side, we really need to look at that. Because it has never been done.
Right. It would make all of our jobs just a tad bit easier. And again, not locked into those numbers, but the ability to be able to look at them and say, okay, well, we need 29 positions, and we'll look at those, you know, maybe phase them in based on the numbers that you can apply to your 5-year budget. So just a thought.
But I just do want to clarify, but I do believe everyone on this board here believes that teacher compensation is #1. So I just wanted to make sure that is the most important thing. Even though we have those 29 positions there, our most important thing is our teacher employee compensation. So.
And I'm going to be blunt now, and I'll probably.
Are you always?
Yeah, well, I kind of am. I don't know where you guys are. I mean, I know everyone talks about the Me Too clauses and you know what's associated with those. I've always had a tough time with that as well. So I hope at some point you're going to look at those too. Maybe that's sort of along the theme of living within our means or what have you. But I can, you know, and maybe it's because they're near and dear to my heart. But I've got the folks that are in the trenches, and I get that there needs to be good supervision to make sure that the teachers teach the teachers, or however you say that. But those folks in the trenches need that help, and to see it just get thrown out across the board sometimes just makes me go, what? And I come from a jurisdiction that never happened. So just food for thought, because when you're talking about a 3% raise to teachers, does that mean everybody gets 3%? Now, I'm talking about the folks, the folks that are cleaning the floors, the folks that are doing the cafeteria work, all that. Those are the folks that I think are the focus of what I've been talking about for the last 4.5 years. So I've always been challenged with that. And I don't know what you can do legally or can't. I'm just throwing it out there. I've always disagreed with the Me Too clause.
I'd say that we probably have some differing opinions on our boards, but I will tell you that that has been a topic of conversation.
Okay.
So there's not too much that we can say about it at the moment.
And that's fine. I'm throwing it out there. And that's, again, that's
I
just me
appreciate
talking. But, you know, you aspire to be to those upper jobs, and that's fantastic, and you get paid accordingly. Good. But then, you know, everybody's going to get a raise and everybody's going to get the same. What? So.
Here again, we have the core one. We have all these issues. You're in the middle of negotiations. We don't know how many groups here at the present time. You're trying to put a budget together. We're just getting ready to put our budget together. We still don't know where the state's going to be. So this is very difficult to project anything, but I really appreciate your focus and what you are telling us. And we will, I think, speak for most of the people on this board. We're going to do our best to help and try to come together on everything.
And we do appreciate that.
We always
And I
have.
know that we're coming up on a hard stop for a couple of you guys. So
Yeah.
with that, I just want to make sure that we cover kind of next steps and.
Yeah, we can keep going. I know a
timelines.
couple of you guys have to leave, and that's fine, but let's keep going and get those, we don't have to rush that,
Okay,
so.
okay, great.
um,
I wasn't sure how many of you had to.
Yeah,
had to
no,
leave.
only 2, so
Okay.
we can pass that along, so.
Can I ask real quickly, is the opioid epidemic part of impetus behind needing an extra 29 people especially? Is that impacting the school? Does this help address that? Like mental illness?
Yes, indirectly, yes. We consider all the social, emotional, mental health, and well-being needs that we're seeing, and that certainly has had an impact.
And this would help address some of that?
We believe it would provide appropriate supports for our students and families as well, in conjunction with our county partners, the health department, other agencies that we partner with, yes.
Because the epidemic's putting a strain on everyone, and I'm sure it's putting a strain on your school system. I don't know how, since I'm not part of it. But if this can help in any way, we can see what we can do.
Well, Dr. Lockhart, is it a true statement the 3 school psychologists are, that's sort of an indirect way that's being rolled in?
The intervention.
And the interventions.
Because I know there's lots of grandparents out there now who are raising their grandchildren because of the loss of their children. And that's affecting the psychology of those children in the school system.
Yes.
You guys see it on a daily basis.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, so I mean, in the information that, is
Yeah.
that in the
Page-
information that we
Page
passed
4,
out?
the intervention positions, it recognizes in the solution summary to help treat mental health concerns, and included in there trauma exposure, so that could be, you know.
Good. I think that's extremely important.
Substance abuse is also noted as well.
Well, I need to slip out to go to a meeting in Union Bridge, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, pay no attention to the 2 that are leaving.
As if you do any other time.
Well, so, that's a consistent theme, okay?
You got it.
So,
Y'all have a lovely afternoon.
so carry on, Donna. Or Steve, again, I know you were interrupted a couple
No,
times, so.
I think it came back around the,
Okay.
you know, the conversation.
Yeah, I will.
I guess in terms of next steps, or one of the things we said we want to do is make sure we continue the opportunity to have conversation. And I can work with Roberta and staff to set up fine dates that are mutually convenient. Is everybody in agreement? Like at least a tentative quarterly opportunity, and then as needed, so if we don't, if there's nothing on an
Yeah.
agenda or not.
Yeah, I think that's important.
There's some timely things coming up. I think a great conversation for the next meeting would be around capital budgets as we begin to get past our operating budget and start looking at our educational facilities master plan. There'll be information we're getting this spring as it relates to some of our capital projects. It'll be important to have conversation.
Yeah, very important. Ken, you touched on that a little bit and kind of bounced off of it, but, you know,
Well, as we get the
we need to
feasibility
get back to that
study.
too, 'cause
And I think one topic that would be an education for the commissioners of how your budgets are broken down. You have basically 12 categories, I think, through the state, and how things get so intertwined. That may be nice way, as far as in education, to realize the budget's not straightforward and simple. It's so intertwined and complex, it's very difficult.
So I agree with you, and you mentioned challenges. A large challenge we have is transparency, is communication to the community, to us, and saying, this is the why. And so the more you can educate us, arm us with, fact sheets to be able to share with our community, because our outreach, within our districts will really help go a long ways. Let us help advocate for you as you continue to build for our schools, because it really is one community that we're dealing with, so.
And Dr. Lucker, does it make sense to talk real quickly about this piece that we've put together that we're trying to accomplish exactly that?
That's a fantastic piece.
I shared that with them at the agency.
It's got colors, small words, I like it.
So what those two just said is, what exactly is it that you do again, Chris?
Plus, I will say, it wasn't that.
Do we really?
Tough question.
I think that those comments go back to Commissioner Wance's on the public perception, that's hollering, oh, you're not funding them, but it's a negotiation. And they
Right.
should recognize that, but it's hard to convey that to them.
Yeah, it is,
Because they
'cause-
don't understand.
Or even that the commissioners are going to put a priority
so-
on one thing versus another.
Ken,
you know.
you're on the same wavelength there. I mean, when you bring us that figure, now the headlines are, commissioners won't fund the budget. There it is. So it's the perception. And we all have to work around that. We really do. So, I appreciate the fact that you have this and your strategic plan includes these, but there's people sitting out there right now going, well, here we go again.
Again, it's not to be so parochial, but it's more of a partnership than a negotiation.
Exactly.
And we've got to look at it that way, because it is to me one community. I have certain schools in my district, they have certain schools in their district, but it's one community, one county, and it's got to be looked at as a partnership in moving forward. I don't know what was the past, in all honesty, but it's not about the give and take of negotiations, it's about the give and take in a partnership and getting the best we can for our community and our kids, so.
It's well said.
Thanks.
Oh, I was going to add, if I could, that maybe just a little bit of info concerning our strategic plan, so when we talk about it or reference it.
And even your
we'll know
pillars, I think,
specifically
need to be
what we're referring to.
addressed.
We have, I can send you some of those as well, very small little information on that. It's also on our website, and we're really trying to push that out now, so.
So I guess we're in agreement then that we'll try for quarterly. If there aren't enough topics, then, we can always skip one, but I don't think we're going to be for lack of topics.
Not
rather
enough
than-
topics.
I don't think we're going to be for lack of topics in the near future. But I think if we did shoot for quarterly, so 3 months from now, that would work out timing-wise very well with the feasibility studies that we're getting back on career and tech and the middle school, Westminster Middle School solution and things like that, so.
And we'll be through budget a little better then, so everybody has a little better
Right.
chance.
I think appropriately, we kept today's discussions more about operating budget, right? Because that's the pressing issue, right? But next time, I think it'll be good timing to start the discussion on the capital project side of it.
Great.
And, we also have some things that we'd like to share on the FCI score and things that we've kind of developed on our side of the house. It's another new concept, so kind of talking about linking everything to the strategic plan. We've also got some measures that we're looking at the condition of our buildings and trying to maintain that, and what is the infrastructure cost involved with that. So that'll all kind of wrap in with the capital projects discussion.
As you know, Commissioner Wance is the primary down at Mako, and I attend also as secondary. So every Wednesday, we're down there in Annapolis during session for the subcommittees and then the Mako legislative, meetings. And so if there's things that you want us also to carry down there, let us know, or someone that we can see down there that could advocate again on your behalf on how we can move forward, kind of where we were talking earlier. Why not, So. just let you know that, information, and we're there, but also opportunity that may come up. So.
And Commissioner Frazier, to a point that you were making earlier about asking the delegation for assistance and what they can help us do. Is like, so I've actually talked with them on several occasions and addressing the 1.5% issue for teacher compensation down in Annapolis. That's one of the things that I've talked with them, and we're planning to, so I'm in conversations with Delegate Shoemaker, basically saying, well, you might want to come down and testify in Annapolis. I'm certainly willing to do that, but that's one issue that I want to make sure that we kind of galvanize everybody behind during this budget cycle.
Exactly, and building those conversations and getting us, we're there. It's a great opportunity. So.
Okay.
Cool.
Anything else? Even though it's a away game for you. Okay, well then we'll work with staff, our staffs to get, another date, and we'll go from there. And I want to thank you all again. It's been beneficial. You heard some of the passion, both sides. We've got that, and, this helps. It really does, because we really didn't have the opportunity to do that before. But even without that opportunity, you've seen what we've done for the last 4 years for education funding. I mean, let's be clear. We've done a pretty good job by being able to see those increases over the years. So, and we are hopeful that we can continue that trend. That's certainly what we're trying to do here, and that's probably why you hear some of the passion that you do. So, So I want to thank you all. We'll see you next time, and keep the communication open. Don't hesitate. I mean, I think I was joking the other day when I wanted to know which one of you was going to sprint across the street when we brought up
Steve Johnson.
It's going to be Johnson, right?
He's the quickest.
He is? Quickest how?
He's surprisingly nimble.
Really? Good emphasis on surprisingly there, so. He's not in the room, is he?
No, he's
okay.
sick.
All right, okay. All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Yep.